I thought it'd be a really good opportunity for us to hear from Brad. You know, Brad's done a lot in his life, his young life. How old are you, Brad?
29 and 85%.
29 and 85%. And, you know, just where you guys are at in terms of your young adult stage, you know, Brad would be a real good inspiration. He's a real good inspiration for you guys, and what you can achieve when you put your mind to it, what you can achieve when you have the things in the right order and everything like that. So I really wanted to just ask Brad some questions tonight, just to inspire you guys, to empower you guys, so that, you know, you guys can continue running in your young adult years, but making sure that your young adult years are fruitful, that they're productive, that you don't look back when you're 30 and go, crap, why did I waste so much time? Or, man, I could be so much further ahead than what I am now. So I thought it'd be a really good opportunity, and Brad, you know, was like, of course, no questions off limit. So it's very good.
Really?
Nah, so it's all good. So I've sent Brad some of these questions for him, not so he can prepare, but just so he could see if if there's anything else that he thought that maybe I missed out, and he added a couple of questions, which is great. So, and like Josh said, there'll be an opportunity at the end of the night for you guys to ask questions. And so if you've got questions when you're hearing Brad speak, just write stuff down. Then at the end, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions, yeah? All good? Excellent. All right, Brad, so tell us a bit about your childhood and growing up.
Well, first I just want to say it is true, like there are no questions off limits, and one of the reasons why I agreed to do tonight is because I think that anything I can do to share my, things I've messed up, the challenges I've had, my failures, things I've done well, and some wins or success we've had, if I can share that to help you guys fast track or avoid some of that stuff, then I feel like it's worth it. So there really is no questions off limits. That's why we're here. So back to your real question though. I was very blessed to grow up in an awesome family. You know, my parents are so amazing. They grew up in government housing, not very, no money, very like low end of society. And they got together at 16 and 18, and they're still together. And when they got together, they saved up some money. They went and bought a block of land in the good area of town and lived in a caravan while they built their shed. Lived in the shed while they built the first floor, lived in the first floor, built the second floor and the third story. And, we had a family home, and we had an amazing street, an amazing neighbourhood, and everyone was the same age kind of thing. So great friends, great fun. And that was really the base. Like, my parents were so deliberate about being parents, and I'm so grateful to have parents like that. We didn't have a lot of money. They definitely weren't rich, but they worked their butts off so my sister and I could have a great life, and we never missed out. And I had some pretty expensive habits like racing motocross. So, but we had a great upbringing, riding BMX every night after school with the kids in the street and that kind of thing. But as we got a bit older and, a bit more aware of what was happening, and my sport became really the driver of our family, I really started to appreciate my parents even more and more, because, racing's not cheap, racing's not easy, and that became my teacher. And, I'm grateful to have a mum who was an amazing mum, but she wore different hats. When we needed love, she loved us just unconditionally, but she was also a brilliant coach. And that meant that we grew up in a very disciplined house. And I was blessed to have my sport, which meant that I didn't really get, caught up in some of the evils of our world, because I was so focused on sport. And mum really helped with that. She taught us that we could just become whatever we wanted to become, and that age was no barrier, where you came from was no barrier. And she made sure every single day that we knew that it didn't matter what we did, but we're Smiths, we're different, and we'll be the best at it. And I think, she'd say, I don't care if you're collecting the garbage, but you'll be the best garbage collector. And that's really the belief system that we grew up with, and I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, that's great. And motocross, you got into motocross. So why motocross? Why not AFL? Why not soccer?
Probably talent was a big problem with AFL. Miranda was just teasing me about my coordination. So, my dad raced motocross, and he loved it. And then I think every motorcyclist, wants to get their kid a bike as early as possible. And I remember being about 4 years old on a bike, way too big for me, but Dad was so excited to see his son ride. He forgot to teach me how to turn, so I crashed, but I could ride. And that's where it started. I loved loved my dirt bike. Literally everything I learned growing up somehow related back to my bike, because I just wanted to be the best rider that I could be. And I had to learn discipline, preparation, fitness, focus, respect for the bike. I had to learn how to make some money so we could get the bikes. And it was an amazing sport to just be a teacher for me. And I got addicted to that. I wasn't outstanding, but I was pretty good. So I think you're at that level where you're good enough that mum and dad know that it's something to pursue, but not outstanding enough that everything gets paid for. So in that sort of grey area. And, when you're racing around the state, then around the country, then different places, it's like, man, it's a full-time job. And, it's a sport that is one of those things where you love the sport so much, you're so free when you're riding, but in 2 seconds you could be on the ground and then in an ambulance. And I was a fair bit. I broke a lot of bones. So maybe I ran out of talent there a little bit too. I don't know if that was to do with coordination, that was more ambition, I think. But yeah.
Excellent. And did it affect your schoolwork at all?
My parents were, number one, you got to be good at school. So when we'd come to the nationals or the state titles, we'd have to catch the boat from Tassie to Melbourne. And all my mates, like there was 2 or 3 guys that would come from Tassie to Melbourne to race with us. They'd take the day off school before and after, when we got back, where my dad would be like, you're going to school till the last minute and we'll go fast to the boat so you can get a bit more school in. And, I wasn't very good at school. I wasn't bad, but I wasn't outstanding. I didn't think that it was overly relevant to me, but I felt like it was part of the game. And, if I've got to be here, I've got to be here. And, I was the kind of kid who paid the kids at the front of the bus to do his homework. But, I did apply myself too, and I applied myself. So I think that for me, mum and dad said, you can ride the bike once you've done your homework. So the motorcycle was the ultimate leverage. And I don't know why, but my sister and I always respected mum and dad in that way, and we just did what they said.
So talking about parenting styles then, do you think that will influence how you will parent your children? Will you do it the same?
Oh, 100%. I think that, my mum has sown into us as, now young adults and how we're going to parent as well. And really that's parenting with intent and having discipline, boundaries, unconditional love, conditional support. Like you got to play the game to get the support and get the things. But also to love with truth is so powerful. I'll give you a couple of stories of my mum. Like my sister won't mind sharing, but she went to Italy and she came back and she had put on a lot of weight. And she came back and mum handed her the running shoes and said, go running. And she did, And that's a really challenging thing for my mum to say to her daughter. But it was the truth and Sheridan did it and it was the right thing to do. And she's done so many things like that with me as well, which is really risky, but the truth. And that's just the family that we came from. It was disciplined, it was strict, but it was just, we never missed out on anything. And I think that's the sort of home that I'd like to create too.
Yeah, great. So, Brap, talk to us about that, where the inspiration for that came from, how you got it started.
Well, the inspiration really came at about 12 or 13. I started to become really aware of how much pressure my sport put on our family. So I'm racing, we're doing the state titles and nationals, and you're driving around the place, it's expensive, and mum and dad never wanted me to feel that, but I did. I could tell, mum and dad was a truck driver, mum was a sales rep, there was not a lot of money, I knew how much motorcycles cost, I knew that my sponsorship wasn't much, it's expensive, and I just didn't want them to have that pressure. And then, I'd see my sister miss out on stuff because I'd be racing, and that's when you really started to feel, wow, I've got to make a big decision here. Like, do you get good enough to be a professional? And that's a big risk. I wasn't outstanding. Or what do you do to be able to do what you want to do and pay to be able to do it? And again, mum was just amazing. Every night after school, we'd read books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You would listen to Tony Robbins on the way to school every morning. Mum would drive us to school. It'd be 35 minutes out of her way, but she didn't want us to catch the bus. She wanted us to listen to educational CDs on the way to school. And I didn't realise what that was at 13. But now I do. Yeah. That's a big effort. And so I wanted to make make my sport not put pressure on my family. So I became intrigued with how that would happen, and got intrigued with business and entrepreneurship and how to create wealth. And Mum would just really point out to me people who were self-made and had followed a process and done things, thought big, followed the rules and created wealth. And I was so intrigued with that. And I think that's so important for all of us as young adults, is to go and find people who've done what you want to do, learn what they did, and then just go do it. Like, it's actually not that difficult. And I was just curious. I got around a lot of great people. At 13 or 14, I started trading the share market just with paper, just not real, just pretending, but using the real market. And then, how's the faith of my parents? So I told you the story before, how they came from a poor area, they saved up, they built their house, they're a very conservative type family, no debt, but, no aspiration financially either. At 15, Mum went and mortgaged the family home so I could trade the share market unsupervised. That is huge faith. That is it's almost borderline stupidity faith. And so at 15, I'm trading the share market, and it's in America. So you stay up all night trading, and I had $50,000, and Mum said, "I trust you with it." And that's some serious pressure, but also some serious trust. And at one point I did a trade, so we were effectively writing insurance for other people's shares, which meant that they would pay us a premium if I said, if the share market drops, I'll buy your shares. So it's a risk. If you're wrong, you've got to buy these shares. And at one point, the market turned on me for more than our family home was worth. And that's a difficult conversation to have with your mum. And she said, "Look, honey, let's just not tell Dad yet." And she trusted that I could trade out of it, and even when I didn't trust that I could. Yeah. And we did. So for me, that really started everything. Through that trading, I got to meet some amazing people, and surrounded by some people who'd created serious wealth. I wouldn't say seriously amazing lives in what we would value as a great life, but for that area of their life, they were unbelievable. And then I started to get curious about business, and I quit school to start an apprenticeship. And I was not the apprentice type kid at all. That was more just to tick the box because society said that you should go to a uni or apprenticeship, and I didn't believe that was right for me, but it was a good way to get out of school so I could start my business.
What sort of apprenticeship?
Electrical and instruments, so dual trade. And that was a bit like my AFL career. Tools don't look very good in these hands. No, it wasn't too bad. But I was trading the market, doing my apprenticeship. Racing was really ramping up. I was 16, 17, and that's the age where it's like, is this something real? Like, are you going to chase this down, or do you just make it a hobby? And I don't know, I think you get to that age, and that's a pretty conflicting conversation to have with yourself. Is like, you got work, you've got trading, then you got this business thing you want to do with the motorbikes, and you're trying to race. Something's got to give. And it didn't at that point. I just learned to sleep less. And honestly, I slept for 4 or 5 hours a night for maybe 2 or 3 years, just because so hungry just to go and go and go. And that meant changing my diet, changing the way I trained, just everything. Everything was a 1%er to try and get more performance. Then started to import some motorcycles while I was doing all this stuff, and that really caught my passion. I could race, I could do business, I could see people love our sport and connect. And my real mission was to help young people to get a clean adrenaline rush through movement, through motorcycling rather than from drugs, crime, violence, and the evils of our world. So we had tracks, we had trainers, we had bikes, and it was an awesome time of life because, at this point I'm 18, 19, we're selling heaps of bikes, and everyone's riding bikes. You see fathers and sons riding, having fun. You see heaps of young kids that were from low social ec areas come to our programs and just ride, and then all my mates riding, and it was just like awesome. And I got addicted. So that's kind of really where the BRAP thing started. That was the start.
Yeah, great. Well, most 16-year-olds aren't making a decision whether to choose between motocross or trading or running a business or doing all that, but it's good that you stuck with it, and you can hear the passion You guys can hear the passion in his voice when he talks about these things, and he's so passionate about it and such a driving force. So who is some people that you listen to that you would recommend listening to that have inspired you? Or
Yeah, well, to answer that question, I reckon we should ask, who would we not listen to? Because this time when I just told you about, like, you're 16 to 19, things are going really well, selling a lot of bikes from home. And I tell you this just to give perspective, but I did $230,000 worth of bikes at 17 at home, and then 1.2 million in first year from a shop. So that's a seriously, like, I didn't know how to comprehend that other than go, let's do another store and another store. And that meant that I had a lot of people come into my life that wanted to give advice. And I think when you're that age and you're full of aspiration, the most dangerous thing you can do is take advice from almost people who want to give it to you. Like, you really got to suss out who's giving that advice and what they carry. And I think the church does an amazing job of that, of helping us filter and using, Jesus as our ultimate sort of mediator around, does this person really carry what I want to create in my life? But I didn't have that at that point. I was just full of ambition. Let's go more, and let's go bigger, bigger, bigger. And it's all happening too slow. But really it was happening really fast. And I got given some free mentors from the government, entrepreneurial mentors. They had some really nice theories to talk about, but I took their advice, and at 19 I made $1 million mistake, and I didn't question what they'd advised me to do. I just thought that they knew what they were doing and did it. And that's the sort of student that I was my whole life. Like, find someone who's got it and do it. But I didn't really verify these guys had it, and I got given these free mentors that just wanted to help people, and that caused me some serious problems and serious mistakes. And I just wanted to share that story to start with, to frame it up, because there's so much risk when we make a decision out of our ambition, not the truth. And that's probably the biggest thing that I'm trying to do now, especially understanding, what Jesus would do, and he wouldn't be worried about how fast he was trying to grow this thing. He just, let's build it generational. For me, that's a real point. But I've been huge about, like, my whole life, even today, is about proximity. So every month I do a list of my proximity list and who are the people that I've got to get around to spend some time with, because they're carrying something that I want to get. And that might mean a coffee, might mean a lunch, might mean a dinner, it might mean a phone call. And I literally spend half my day, I reckon, like, without over exaggerating, almost half my day calling people who are a little bit further ahead of me in life. Just saying, mate, this happened, what would you do? 7:30 this morning, I had a guy call me up who's unbelievable man of God and making a lot of money in a property transaction that I'm trying to do. And he called me at 7:30 to say, how you going? Try this, try that. What are the problems? Let's do this. Like, you couldn't buy that. And this guy carries something. And so before I share, like, the sort of flagship people that I've followed, I really want to encourage you guys just to know that there's so many local people, especially in our church here and our community, that have done amazing things and built amazing lives that want to teach. Like, successful people want to share. Our elders want to share. The people in the church want to share. Anyone in the community who's done something, they want to share it. The problem is most people don't ask. So that's the first thing. And then, for me, it became a lot of local people who were really, like, doing stuff. But I also was in a position where I could seek out coaches and people that, were famous or well-known. And Tony Robbins is the number one, and I love him. I think that his stuff is unbelievable, and we should all be doing it. But when you chase these people down, you've got to know who you are in God first, because we're going for a portion of their life, not their whole life. They're not Jesus, they carry something. So I think that's so important to know your identity first, because ambition's a dangerous thing. And that's really what we're dealing with when you're going to a mentor or following someone, is your ambition is to become like them, when really we should be trying to become like Jesus. And these guys might carry something to help us become, our own identity in that. But Tony Robbins was a huge part of my life. I love Jim Rohn. You guys, if you haven't checked him out, he's an awesome guy. He was actually Tony Robbins' mentor. And he's a man of God, very, very overt as well. And he's got some awesome speeches on the internet you can watch, and he's passed away now. Got some great books too. And Zig Ziglar. Have you guys ever heard of these guys? Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar. I also love Seth Godin. He's a kind of strange guy, but he really thinks so differently. And he's not a Christian guy, so again, know who you are before you listen to him. But just the way he thinks, his brain is so out there. He's a disruptor, and think it's important for us to carry that. And he actually has written a lot about the church as well. And I agree with most of what he's written about the church in how we've got to get outside the four walls. If you've got something, you've got to carry it. And he thinks the church is the church's worst enemy. And she has a really interesting story about that, which you guys can Google and check out. But again, know who you are in Jesus before you go to these guys. So that would be sort of my sort of main people that I drew inspiration from. But, I feel like the guru age is so dead. I think Caleb spoke about that at the start of the year, and it's so true. Like, I've come from a position where I've been very blessed to be able to go seek out coaches, and generally guys who are the best in their area. But the problem is they're not fathering you, they're coaching you. There's such a difference when they can only see your actions, not your motives. And I've really noticed that a lot, even with Pingy this year being my mentor, how amazing it is to have someone that's not trying to prove his value to me. Like, he couldn't care less what I think of him, I don't think. He's not trying to prove his value. He's just there to make sure that I'm clean, my motives are tight, I'm really modeling Jesus, and I'm carrying Christ into my life. And that's so powerful. So for me, though, I had like all these guys just giving me 5% of who they were and no real accountability, just self-accountable. And that's dangerous. So encourage you guys to seek mentors, but most importantly, go after and win the hearts of your spiritual fathers here.
So you said, making sure you have your identity in God before you're going out and seeking these people.
Yeah.
So you obviously didn't have that before you were seeking them out. So how would you have approached it differently, or would you have still done the same thing that you did when seeking these guys out, or how would you have?
That's a really good point. I definitely wouldn't do much different in how I seek them out. We'll talk about that in a sec. But I would 100% be different when I did seek them out. Because, now when I talk to people, I know who I am. I can't be shaken. I'm not trying to impress them. I'm there to give and to get. I'm not there to work out who I am. And that's so powerful. And, it's so refreshing. People love it. And I'll share a story from yesterday. I think I shared it at Connect last night, which it really touched me. I got to meet a guy who is the third richest man in the country, a billionaire family, amazing like material and business mind. Like, you can imagine this guy, he doesn't need to catch up with me. Anyway, how I got to meet him was about 4 or 5 years ago. I really wanted to ask him some questions because I'd seen he'd done a transaction that I just couldn't comprehend how he did it, and I wanted to learn. So I rang his office and asked to meet Daniel, and his secretary said, "Sorry, Brad, Daniel, very busy, doesn't take meetings like this." And I was like, "No worries." And I thought, I'm going to call this lady like every second day for, until I get a meeting. So I'd ring her up, tell her the story, and she'd just say no every time. Yeah. And one day I thought, I'm going to get to Daniel. And I rang up at 5:35 and sounded really flustered. I said, "I was chatting to Daniel, got cut off, could you put me through?" And I got put through to Daniel. And I said, "Daniel, I'm a young guy. I'm a huge fan of yours. And I've got 10 questions. I respect your time. I'm going to be 20 minutes. I'll come to you for coffee. I'll pay for the coffee. You must have coffee every day. Like, surely you'd meet me." He's like, "Well, all right, I will." After a bit, he goes, "Yeah, I will." And he gave me a time, like, I think it was like 10 weeks later, like a specific time, 10 weeks later at this coffee shop. And I kind of felt like he was blowing me off a little bit. But of course, I turned up at the coffee shop, bought him the coffee, asked him the 10 questions, said, "I respect your time, you got to go." He ended up giving me another hour and a half of just questions. And so this was like 5 years ago. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Like, he answered my questions and he loved it. And he invited me back a month later for another coffee. And at that coffee, he said, "Brad, how did this even happen? Like, how did you get to come and have a coffee with me?" And I told him the story and he loved it. The thing that I found so interesting in that, I said, "You must get that all the time. Like, I'm so sorry to be like that persistent pain in the backside type guy." And he goes, "You know what, Brad, other than the media, who all they want to do is write good or bad about me, I've literally never had someone who has pure motives of, creating what I've created, ring me up and ask me how I did it." So isn't that interesting? Like, I was a 24 or 5-year-old kid who went there with a notepad to ask him questions on how he became the third richest guy in the country, and no one else had done that. And that really encouraged me. And I want to encourage you guys to that. Like, successful people are desperate to share their story. They want to see their work passed on. They want to help. And the problem is we just don't ask. We don't think we're worthy. We don't think we're enough. We don't think we can add value to them. But we can add so much value to them because they all were where we were at that time. And I could see it in him that he just loved my hunger. He was so, I reckon he went back to his office more revved up from a meeting with a young, naively ambitious kid than he would have from anywhere else at that point in his life. And anyway, so a few years went past, and he ended up ringing me up one time and gave us a position at High Point Shopping Centre because he owns it. And we got to open a Brap store in the shopping centre because he had a free space while they were renovating. So that was pretty cool. And at that point I was like, this all happened because I rang this guy up 100 times until he took a coffee with me. I had coffee and I asked him a few questions. I didn't do anything. And then anyway, so that was a few years ago now. And then I hadn't heard from him. So I called out to him a few weeks ago. Actually, after Caleb shared that message about who's at the gates and how you're influencing them, I got really stirred with that and thought, I am so underperforming here. So I reached out to a few people. One of them was Daniel. And I sat down with him yesterday or the day before for a coffee. And it was so interesting because this is an extremely wealthy guy. You'd think he'd have his whole life together. And I was there to talk about a property thing I'm trying to learn about. And we had a 30-minute conversation booked that went for over an hour. And he ended up rescheduling a guy who was trying to buy $15 million worth of art off him. He goes, I can lose the art sale. Let's keep chatting. And this is like while I'm sitting there. And he wanted to ask me, he's like, what's different? Like, you're part of this Hillsong thing. Like, what's different? And I thought, isn't that interesting? Like, and it all happened. The reason I wanted to share the story was it all happened. We were sitting having a coffee and he saw a good-looking girl and he said, that's a pretty girl. I'm going to go over and introduce myself. And just before that, he told me how he just had a divorce. I was like, mate, that is the last thing you need to be doing. And a bit of a joke, but it just like, he was like, what's different? Like, because everyone else in his world, I would guess, is just molding to him because he's so influential. And I think that's what we have when we carry Christ into these meetings, is that we know who we are. And it just intrigues people and it's refreshing, and that's our job. Doesn't matter how old we are, doesn't matter our credentials, people want to hear it. And what really stirred on me when I was thinking about that was that, you know, Jesus was such an unexpected voice. Like, you know, he entered into a town on a donkey. Could you imagine Trump entering into a town on a donkey? Like, he was such an unexpected vessel to share the word of God, if for most people. And I think that's us as young adults, to hear such a pure, powerful, authentic, and accurate word is unexpected to come from young people. And therefore people listen. And I think that's a real encouragement for us as young people. And if Frankston's our city, how are we sharing that? You know, how are we influencing the people at the gates? And the question that I got for myself was like, I haven't heard the mayor's vision for Frankston. And that's not good. Like, so, you know, that's the same for all of us. Like, what part of our world, like who's at the gates, how are we influencing them, and why are we not? And so that's a bit of a challenge and encouragement for us all.
Oh, that's great.
I can't remember the actual question you asked me now.
Neither can I. It's gone. It's gone. No, that's really good. That's really good, and really good advice, and very sound advice, and a good strategy just to make a phone call.
So true. Yeah. Like, there's literally no magic to get in these meetings. Just ask. You know, most people have just never been asked to catch up and hear. In a coffee, I just always think, we call it net, no extra time. So how do you do it in net time? Having a coffee, do you need to go to the airport? I'll drive you there. You know, you're having dinner, I'll make it. You know, whatever it is to fit in. Do you have to pick your kids up? I'll come. You know, whatever it is to fit into their life. Like, just be bold. But for me, I always think if I'm calling these people and being persistent, I don't care how many times you call and be persistent, but I do make it a prerequisite, and I teach our guys, our staff this too, that you got to add value every time. And how do we add value to someone like Daniel the other day? I couldn't add him any value in his business mind or in anything really, but I could show him hunger, because I reckon he's lacking that. Most people are broken or burned out. so we can show them hunger and ambition. They love that. You could add just a smile, like you could add some value, like be fun. Or you could add value. The best way to be interesting is to be interested. Like, that's, everyone carries all that.
Very good. So we spoke a bit about who's influenced you. What about the top 5 books? Top 5 books that you've read that you recommend that for these guys to read?
That's a good one. Like, I love reading. I've been, I don't know, there's probably, number one, I feel like The Game of Life and How to Play It. That really shifted my faith journey a lot. I'd always been aware of God, but not obedient to God or to Jesus, really. I was aware of God, but didn't acknowledge Jesus so much. So therefore I could, not have the accountability. And that book really started throwing sparks for me, especially in the prosperity area, and areas where you're hanging on to your own desire rather than submitting. So I love that book, The Game of Life and How to Play It. It's by Florence someone. You can actually listen to the audio on YouTube too. The second one is a book that I read every year for ages was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Have you guys heard of that book? You want to know who you are in Christ before that book, because he shares a bit about faith, but he also has some stuff that's not obedient to Jesus at all. So again, you've got to really know who you are, but some amazing thought patterns there and stories. And this was, let's just say it was the 20s or the 30s maybe, I might have the years wrong, but he was commissioned by one of the richest guys in the world to go out and interview all the other extremely wealthy people and find out what they carried, what they thought, what they did, and then put it into a book. So you want to read that one. The other one is I love reading Warren Buffett's annual shareholders report. It's a bit, seems a bit strange, but you want to know what that guy thinks. Sorry, how that guy thinks, not what he thinks. Like, who cares what company he's investing in, but how he thinks, that's interesting. Very generational mindset, very left of what the media would say and that kind of thing. So that's just a bit of a interesting one. And I read 7 Men this year. I love that book. I think a fair few church people read that book too. Because there's just so many amazing stories in there of men who had absolute conviction. There's also 7 Women, but I haven't read that one. But it's the same concept, and that is that these guys had so much conviction when they went out and they changed the world. And they didn't start as world changers. They started as obedient Christian men who had a vision and they took action. And then they didn't compromise when they got big. Actually, they got more obedient as they got bigger, and that's pretty rare. And I think I've given you 4, haven't I? The last one, this is another one that's kind of like the content's good, but it's more so the thought pattern that it creates I love, and that's the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. There's a lot of stuff in there that's not really relevant, but I love the thought of leverage. And I think that's something that we need to get as Christians. Our ability to get leverage is our ability to influence. As one person, we can do little. As a group, we can do a lot. But as a group with leverage, resources, thought patterns, technology, all the things aligned to our mission, we can do so much. So the 4-Hour Workweek's not really about working 4 hours. It's about how do you do 40 hours work in 4 hours so you can do 10 times more, which is a great thought pattern. And Tim Ferriss is... he's a freak, that guy. So, I would check those out.
Great. And Entrepreneur of the Year, you won that.
Yeah.
What was that for?
Being an entrepreneur.
Anything specifically? Like, why did you get chosen as opposed to all the other
good
people?
Question. We were really blessed at that time. We won Australian Business of the Year 4 years in a row, and then Entrepreneur of the Year 2 years in a row. And it really came back to a mixture of things. It was what's your business model? Is it unique? Is it disrupting an industry? Is it growing rapidly? So does the market agree it's a good idea? And are you making a difference, like your social responsibility? And it was on growth percentages. It was an amazing experience I didn't think we'd even make, like when I got asked to put the application in, it was like 5,000 words, and it was a real big effort because you get nominated, then you get selected, then you've got to fill out a heap of info. And the whole time I was writing this stuff out, I'm like, man, this is such a waste of time. I should be selling bikes. That's probably the entrepreneurial mindset. But it was amazing. And the reason why I continued to go down the award route was because it was such great PR. All of a sudden, people wanted to know our story. And I love what we talk about here at Stature. You know, who you are is so much more important than what you are. But status does have the ability to open doors, because the world does care what you are. We don't care what we are. You know, my credentials carry no weight at church. And I've loved that. Like, seriously, Caleb would probably use them against me if I ever tried to. When I first started asking him 100 questions about Jesus and God, he didn't care at all, you know, about my status. It was all about stature, obviously. But I do think that status has its place for opening doors in the world, as long as we know where it sits. And that got us a lot of PR, unbelievable amounts that we couldn't have paid for. And that's working against me at the moment, but we can talk about that in a minute. Yeah.
So, thinking back to Brup, why importing bikes? Why not just doing what every other motorbike shop does and selling already branded, well-known brands, things like that?
Yeah, good point. You know, my mission was to make our sport accessible and affordable so more people could enjoy it, and so we could get young people a clean adrenaline rush through our sport. And a Kawasaki or Yamaha, a 450 or 250, is $10,000. We wanted to make a 125, kind of like a BMX on steroids, that you could buy for like $2,000. And also we'd do them on payment plans, so it was $3 a day, interest-free. And when we first started, you could literally get finance if you're over 18 via a text message. Like, they were giving money away. So it was such a great platform entrepreneurially to get people into our sport and get people loving and moving, you know, on our motorcycles. So that was number one. It was different. Number two was that it was really big in America. So they raced in stadiums a bit like Rod Laver Arena, so smaller stadiums. It was like BMX, but with a motor. Everything I loved about motocross, but you know, it was smaller, affordable. I didn't have to be a full-time athlete. I could be a business person all year, get fit for 3 months, turn up at the world titles and hang on and hope kind of thing. So I loved that. And our sport was really just fresh and new and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, but they were building custom bikes in America that cost between, you know, $10,000 and $15,000. So we wanted to build a bike that could be affordable off the showroom floor, $2,000 or $3,000. Could, you know, didn't have to be custom, so you could literally take it and race it. And most importantly, could be competitive with the Americans, their custom bikes. And I don't know, it was just timing really. I thought, if this is real, like, I got to get myself on a plane and I got to go to China and find a factory that believes in my vision. And I was 18, never been outside of Tasmania without mum or dad, never been outside of Australia ever, and certainly couldn't speak Chinese. And I remember landing in China, and I was also a pretty like she'll be right type attitude, let's just wing it. And I thought I'll get my accommodation and my interpreter when I got to China. And I ended up having to go 3.5 hours into southern regional China to this town, and I got off the bus and realised the world's biggest trade fair was being held in this town. 2 million people are in town, so there's no accommodation, and there's no interpreters. And I'm just a kid with a peroxide blonde mullet that wanted to build some bikes. And like, honestly, it's when I look back and join the dots, God has been so over my life the whole time, and I've muscled him out a lot. But you know, moments like this is just, it makes me emotional almost. Like, I ran into a man who I had no idea who he was, and he said, I'm going to be your interpreter. I'm going to take you wherever I want to go. And you know, he even paid for flights and stuff. And I don't have this guy's phone number. I've never met him again. He sold nothing to me. He was just like a guardian. And I said, I'm going to as many factories as we could find, and we're going to go through them all for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we're going to go and choose the best one. So we're going to choose who we're going to do business with. And I remember going to my first factory, and at this point, I hadn't even pictured what a motorcycle manufacturing plant looked like. I literally had no idea, and I didn't even realise that I'd never thought about that either. And I drive in with the driver and my interpreter, Mr. Yen, and we get there, and it's 4 stories, and they produce 16,000 motorcycles a month. And I'm like, wow, a month. And I had to go to the top floor and meet the owner, and this short Chinese guy came out and he put his hand out to shake hands, and I couldn't see fingers from all the gold rings. And he had like 6 assistants in his office, a massage room, a resting area, like all this stuff in his massive office, and a big marble desk. And he sat down behind it, and I had to share with him my vision. And he didn't speak English and I didn't speak Chinese, and I'd never spoken to someone through an interpreter in my life. And I'm sharing this guy my vision about building this frame and this wheels and this suspension, and then most importantly about the concept on how we were going to make it so our sport was affordable so more people could enjoy it. And at the end of it, he stood up and he slammed his hand on the table and he put his hands in the air and he goes, "I love it." Of course, through the interpreter, he didn't speak English. He said something else. He goes, "I love it, I love it." I'm like, "Awesome." And then he goes, "How much money do you have?" I'm like, "I don't have any money." He goes, "You got no money to invest." He goes, "What's your distribution channel? How many distributors do you have signed up? Like, how many bikes can you sell?" And I didn't know what a distribution channel was. He goes, "So you got no money, you got no distribution channel, so tell me, what's your engineering experience? How do you plan on engineering the motorcycle?" And I have no idea how to engineer a motorcycle still. And so he goes, "You got no money, no engineering, no distribution, so I don't know, how can you make this a worthwhile investment for me and my factory?" And he laughed me out of the office because I had no idea. And I was so naive. I had no idea how much it cost to produce a motorcycle. And to give you guys an example, the plastic, so the fenders on our bikes, the front guard and the back guard and that kind of stuff, it costs $100,000 just for the molds. So before you actually get to touch a bit of plastic, it costs $100,000 just for the molds, let alone the frame, the wheels, the suspension. So you can imagine how much it cost. And also, I was presenting an idea that we'd build 7 brand new models. So it's a lot of money. So the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth factory laughed me out of their office. And I just remember being over there thinking like, wow, this might not happen. And I just thought I could give up and I could go home and, people would probably congratulate me for having a crack, like they'd at least understand that I had a crack. And I thought I didn't come to China to go home and have people understand and sympathize that I tried my hardest. And honestly, I did try my hardest. I put all my money into it. I was in China, I had no idea what I was doing. I stepped way outside my comfort zone and it just wasn't happening. But I don't know, I just felt like we're not going home until. And I said to my interpreter, "How many factories are there here in China?" And he goes, "There's 800. So we're not going home until 801 of them have laughed us out of the office. And my interpreter agreed, and he got very good at saying "next factory" in Chinese. Because the 10th, the 20th, the 30th, the 40th, there was over 50 factories that laughed me out of their office. And at 50, you really start to question, this is probably not going to happen. But again, I thought, people probably wouldn't just understand. They honestly would congratulate that. I would probably go home and people would say, what a great young man. I honestly felt that. And I was like, but that just feels so shallow to me that people are going to congratulate me for trying to do something. And we're going to do it. And I don't know, for the the grace of God. And at that point, I didn't really acknowledge God. I knew that it wasn't me. I knew that it was God, but I didn't I probably took it on as, I just got lucky. But I ran into 2 young French guys that had just moved to China, and they had a dream of building a motorcycle manufacturing facility, and they had financial backing from their families. And they needed to take a risk on someone. And I convinced them it was me. And, then we partnered and they spent all the money. I didn't spend any money, didn't have any money. I promised to sell way more bikes than I knew how to sell. And for somehow we did. And, now we have our own manufacturing contracts. Those guys are our arch rivals, maybe friendly. And we design and develop everything locally here. Then we use China and Thailand for our assembly. And we're the only motorcycle on the planet to do lifetime warranty. We became the only bike to ever win that American World title as a production bike. And the thing that's most proud is that last year, probably the year before, because last year was a bit slower, but the year before we taught over 1,000 people how to ride a motorcycle for the first time, and to get a clean adrenaline rush through movement, not through the evils of our world. And man, that just gives me such a buzz to look back and see that God was there the whole time, even though I wasn't aware.
Oh, that's great. Great story. Gosh. I would have given up after 20. No, probably 10.
You would have had to walk home. You were in China 3.5 hours away.
So you probably already answered a little bit, but maybe you can just sort of articulate it a bit more. So if someone has an idea that they want to get off the ground and get running, what's the sort of a pathway that they could take for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I knew that you were going to ask me that one, and I actually didn't prepare for any questions except that one, because I feel really challenged by giving that type of advice, because on one hand, I don't want to motivate you to go and chase an idea, and on the other hand, I don't want to knock the idea out of your life and out of what you're carrying. But if I'm totally honest, the idea space is highly competitive. Like, honestly, no one cares for your idea. It's how do you execute your idea. The idea space, everyone's got an idea that's going to change the world, but the people that are actually doing it, that's not very competitive. So for me, it's been, and when you asked that question, I thought, what's been real for me, the last year or so, as I've been really trying to be obedient to Jesus versus when I was 18 and just naively ambitious. And when I was 18, I'd look at the idea, I'd get so pumped up on the possibilities and the ambition, and then I'd just go and willpower my way through. And 50 factories, whatever it took just to make it happen. But now what I would do is I would pray on it for a while, make sure I've got absolute clarification and verification that it's God's idea, not my idea. Because the idea space is so competitive that you're going to need conviction. Because not only are your competitors going to try and knock it out of you, the enemy's going to be there, but also it actually is competitive. Like, you are competing for someone else's money, which is their idea. You're actually in a battle. And I think business is one of the most spiritual battles that you're ever going to take, because you can't just get feeling good. There's a number sitting there. There's people's wages need to be paid. There's, it's real stuff that's sitting in front of you, and that's the ultimate test of faith. So you're going to need absolute conviction that your idea is of God's will for you. So that's number one, is verify with God. Make sure that you sit on it. Don't rush into just pulling the trigger. But also, patience is not laziness. I think patience is taking the steps in God's timing. Laziness is sitting on the couch hoping it comes. And hope alone is not a growth strategy. You've got to be a strategic person in God. And Jonathan David spoke really well about raising up strategic men and women of God. And when I say you got to have conviction, Caleb said that conviction's definition was action and articulation. So if we look at our idea, first we've got to be able to clearly articulate the idea, which means you've got to have dot points, you've got to have a plan, you've got to have a strategy, you've got to verify it with God and make sure that it's God, and then you've got to go and verify it with man to make sure you can explain it very simply, that it's real, and ask these people that have done it to pick it to pieces for you. So I've got a strategy. We're doing our best work yet at the moment. And I've gone to different people. I've got a 30-page document which is verifying my strategy. So I've clearly articulated each step of the idea. Then I've taken it to men of God to verify it with God first. And then once that's happened, I've taken it to people that have done it 100 times and said, am I dreaming here? What's the challenge? What's the opportunity? Why is this not going to happen? What would you do here? What have you done here? And then get it verified. So number one's definitely like conviction is going to be required. And then it just comes back to, conviction's like articulation. Then it comes back to action. Like, are you really willing to step out and to be so vulnerable that this could fail? And are you willing to tell people, to share your vision, and then for it to fail so badly in front of you that all your identity is ripped away from it? Because, you have to look at the reality. 80% of businesses fail. An idea is a business. You can't have an idea without a business, whether it's charitable or commercial. There's a business model that's going to drive that. Whether it's people tithing, that's still like you've got to have the belief of the people in the idea. You're getting people convinced that your idea is going to make a difference and add value. You have to understand that most of them fail, and that's just the facts. So you got to be ready to be so convicted that you can stand the test of a storm. And I really want to challenge you guys to research Dan and Justine Flynn from Thank You Water. because I've just got such a man crush on Dan. He's the ultimate story of conviction. I mean, and not only that, what a man of God. Like, he's a brilliant husband, he's a brilliant dad, he's a brilliant businessman, and he's changing the world. And he lives in Melbourne, and he's our age. And how many of us have called him to say, let's go to coffee? And he's a busy guy, so he might not go to coffee, but one day he will. And I just think it's such a role model for us as Christians who, we've been so stirred. We've got such great leaders in Caleb and all the other leaders and TP and all these guys that are really stirring us to get out there and be sent. Let's go and have role models that are doing it and have been through the battles. Like, Dan's hands have gotten dirty. He's had to go and do it. So back to your question, if you've got an idea, where do you start? Firstly, conviction, which is articulation and action. And then secondly, get around people who are doing it and be held accountable to actually doing it. And don't draw any significance from the plan. Caleb said, no one cracks champagne on the blueprint. So true. Let's not get high on our ideas. We always say it's numbers on the wall, not high on ideas. Because so many people come and get so pumped up on their blueprint and their idea, their hope is their growth strategy, they're high on the idea rather than getting out and doing it. And let's crack the champagne on the results.
Very good. And how, having a relationship with God, how has that affected your business? Two-part question. How does that affect your business and your entrepreneurship now? But thinking back to the previous 10, 15 years, how would you say that the things that you did were godly principles, or that you just didn't know that they were godly principles, or something else?
I'm giving long answers, so you're going to have to remember those two questions.
Yeah.
Look, honestly, I've always been aware of God. So I've always been a good person, not a God person. So been close. Like, I've acknowledged God. Even when I was 18, even 13, before I'd race motocross, I'd pray to God and say, God, keep everyone safe, keep me safe, and make sure I win, that type of thing. So, I mean, although that's pretty shallow and is a very immature relationship with God, it's still like you're acknowledging God. And even in those moments, like when I told you I went to China, I was like, that's God, lucky. Like, I knew there was God, but I just didn't really know God. So I've definitely we've done a lot of good things and a lot of God things, but the difference is that when you're a good person, you're able to compromise in the name of progress. When you're following Jesus, there's no compromise in Jesus. And the reason why you don't have to compromise is because you've got absolute conviction that where you're going, you're fully sent. Where when you're a good person, you went there on your own willpower. And anywhere you went is either going to burn you out or it'll burn out. Where anywhere you are sent, you're on God's plan. And you can have conviction, and we can be the most confident people in the world because we can cast all our burdens to Christ and walk forwards with absolute freedom and absolute abundance and absolute faith that what we're doing is correct. So I feel like for me, that means that progress is probably the biggest area of progress and compromise are the two biggest words of the difference between good and God, I reckon. And that's meant that we've really had to slow a lot of things down. And to tell the truth, I've been coming here for 2.5, nearly 3 years now. And the first year and a half, I was not willing to lay it all down. Everything was going well. We were doing good things. We were making money, getting a lot of PR. Everything was going well. I didn't know how to turn the ship when it was going well. And then we've had real challenges come upon us legally, and our business is really challenged financially at the moment, which has been such a blessing to be able to fully line everything up to God and fully line everything up to heaven, because we've got the label of poor old Brad and Brup. Look at all the challenge they've got. Things are not going well. We can be behind the scenes aligning everything to our purpose for our legacy work, where before we're trying to make quick money, quick impact in a year or two. Now it's like, how do I make sure there's a platform for, when I have a wife, when I have a family, when my kids have kids, how do we make something that is remembered and makes a difference? God is generational. I love what we've been taught here around that. So I feel like obedience is huge in, today, for example, I'm right in the battle, right close to sealing, some really big deals and like right on the brink of breaking through. And today I was like, God, I'm just going to sit here and wait. Like, I just need you to make it so clear what way I've got to go, because I'm at a Y junction where before I would have honestly just got on the phone and been like, let's outwork this situation. Let's make 1 million phone calls. Let's get everyone on the board. Let's push through. Let's push. And I love Pastor Andrew's definition of push, which was pursue understanding, seek humility. And humility means that you don't need to be on the phone belting 100 calls out. It means you need to wait on God, and when he talks, go. And that's the difference. And patience is a really hard thing to learn in a day. Yeah.
Very good. So how has your relationship with God affected your working relationship with your staff?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I honestly think to start with, I just thought I'd lost the plot. And this was just another 1%er that Brad was up to. But, and I was pretty covert to start with, especially like 2 years ago, and I was really just getting curious and getting stirred, but couldn't really articulate what was happening. But then last year, I just had such an encounter with Jesus that from that moment I became overt. And that means that when we're having meetings, the Bible's sitting there. They're looking at that thing, and I love that. It's because all of a sudden there's a measurement. Even though a lot of my staff don't know Jesus and they really don't know the nature of God, to sit the Bible there on my desk, it knows that we're answering to someone, and it's not me. It's shifting. Like, I've really drawn myself back from trying to be everything to everyone and then sow into the key people. Because I know that if I can disciple them, they can affect everyone else. Or if I'm watered down across, we had 50 dealers. I spent 8 nights at home the year before last because I was everywhere. Where this year I've been at home every day, sowing into the same, half a dozen people and really trying to shift their hearts. And it's happening. Like, my family comes to church. We're all giving our hearts to God. My cousin Lisa, she's our sales manager in Frankston. She's given her heart to the Lord. The wife of my general manager, who was a full atheist, she's given her heart to the Lord. And then Toby, my general manager, sat me down at the table the other night and goes, looks like I'm going to have to ask the question. I'm like, what's the question? He goes, who's this Jesus bloke? I'm like, great question. And, he came to church the other night, and there's just stuff happening. And that's the cool bits. Like, you get to see that, and it's cool to, like, just see Jesus and God work through you. But most importantly, I think that it's brought a different sense of humility to our team. And especially in a moment when we're under serious challenge. Like, you guys have all heard it before, but I've had for 16 months the New South Wales police chasing us because of an allegation that a competitor made that's connected to a police officer, and they're going after us as hard as they can. And when you've spent 16 months chasing someone, you've got 7,000 pages of evidence against them, but you've adjourned for 16 months, there's something up. Yeah. And the amount of bullying that's come our way means that I've got 2 staff members that are on anxiety leave. There's a man from the federal government that audited us. He's on anxiety leave. We've been audited by the federal government twice and passed. Hasn't been given to the police yet. So there's a huge amount of bullying and games. Our business has gone from highly profitable to losing money at the moment. Credibility, my general manager was on the front page of the newspaper in handcuffs, lost custody of his daughter because his ex-wife used that as a character reference to get more child support. You talk about challenge, it's been a challenging year, and we could not have got through that this year without God. And I was kind of seeking God out, but like honestly, in a Brad kind of way, like, God, I want you in my life, but on my terms. And then when this disaster stuff happened, it's just been me crying out to God and getting humble and aligning everything to Him, and that affects the people. And they see that we can go through this, and myself especially have been so impacted by Jesus, to go through this peacefully, calmly, doing our life's best work with what we're working on next, at the same time as all my credibility has been ripped away, all our financial resources ripped away, and even our dealers, they're getting bullied by the police, and they don't get to see any facts from us. So that's meant that we've got asked a lot of questions about how and why we've been able to carry this ourselves this way. And that's only by the grace of God. So I think that's so great to have that testimony work through our business.
That's great. So tell us some of your biggest failures, how you responded to them, and how you would respond to them now.
That's a great question. So first thing is I made a big mistake when I was like 19 or 20. So I think I told you before, I got some advice from someone. I had a massive tax bill and I got advised to go and buy a heap of trees because it offsets your tax. The government had a scheme on. And I did, but my trees never got planted. And the company went bankrupt, which meant that we lost a lot of money and it was on finance. And when you're 19 or 20 and you make a mistake that big, you've pretty much got two options. One is to pack up and go home and you failed, or the other one is to just get so hungry that you're not going to let them win. And I went that way, and too far that way really, like so performance driven. So that was at like 19, 20. And then at about 24 or 25, I started a finance company. We raised capital from America. It went really well, exactly to plan actually. And then we partnered with a big capital firm in the city, and they gave us a lot of money to lend out as a finance company. And I got chopped up massively. Again, made all my decisions out of ambition. I didn't really go in there as saying like, I've built a great company, I'm taking it somewhere, I'm going somewhere. I went there to say, we've built something and you guys are way better than me, I hope you can take it somewhere. And they chopped me up, and that cost us, like that's another $1 million mistake. And my partner who was in that business, he walked away and literally walked away and left us with all the debt, and I had to pay it. And I had the opportunity to go bankrupt or pay it. And I would have been $1 million better off to go bankrupt, but we decided we'd pay it because that's who we are. And again, that's the same thing. That's such a big mistake that you really only have two options: pack up and fail, or just push through and persist. And I did that, and we did that. It was our whole family and our whole business really as well. I don't know, like those sort of failures just make you, I think. Like there's some serious battle scars, and wisdom comes from scars often. And there's still lots to learn, but yeah, there's some pretty good ones.
Yeah, great. So would you have done things differently now?
100%. Both times I made the decision out of ambition on what could be. And I was willing to risk everything to make it happen. And like with the finance company, we got given $3 million to build a software system and $50 million to lend out. And that's a lot of money when I didn't get that personally, but the business did. And I made all of my decisions about what we could do with that, not is this the truth, is this right, is this God's purpose? And I always believed that my purpose was my business and all the things that I was doing, where through Christ you realise that your platform is not your purpose. Purpose is to just love people and love God. Our platform could be these businesses, your sport, your work, whatever, but our platform is not our purpose. And that's a huge difference. That's an identity shift. That's where I'd be different now. I'd be firstly be diligent to make sure I was sent by God. I'd not went on my own willpower. Secondly, I wouldn't make the decision out of any ambition. It would be made out of, is this the truth? Is this right? Is this God's plan? And then I'd verify it a lot.
Yeah. That's great. So we've got 2 questions left. What would 30-year-old Brad tell 20-year-old Brad?
Well, I'm not 30, mate. I'm hanging on to that.
29 and 85%, Brad. Tell 20-year-old Brad.
Man, it's such a cliche question, but it's so tough as well, isn't it? Honestly, I'd just tell 20-year-old Brad to just chill, like just take a breath. It's going to be okay. 30 is so young. When I was 20, I thought that at 30, I'd be married, kids, a home, life would be ended, that kind of thing. And I was going so fast, where now it's like I can't wait for the next stage of my life. And 30 is so young, so I'm guessing when I'm 40, I'm probably going to think 40 is young. And even probably at 50, I'm probably going to think 50 is young. There's plenty of time. So act, we live in the moment we are today, definitely act, but just know that you're building something for what's next. And that's generational. And do something, just do one thing just so well that it's going to change the world. You don't need to be doing all this stuff like trading, working, racing, doing business. Just find out from God what's that one thing that you're going to punch in the face and do it. And do it really well. It'd be so great that no one can ignore you.
That's very good. Last question, and then we'll get you guys to ask some questions, okay? So get your questions ready. What's the biggest things you've noticed as you've entered into the church from the outside?
That's a question I said you could ask me. I didn't prepare for it. I just think the biggest thing is the power of the home. That's more important than anything, really. And I came here looking for a 1%er. How do I get a bit better? How do I do a bit more? How do I go a bit harder? How can I use God to get more? Really, if I was honest. But the power of here is just being so open, vulnerable, humble, fully linear to a spiritual father. And then the power of the homes. Like you see the homes here, and this is different to the world. People don't have great marriages in the world. People don't have great parents and parenting in the world. So they're the things that I've noticed so much, and that we're just stewards of God's resources. Nothing we have is actually ours. And that's a really big shift. But yeah, I think I just love seeing young people like we all are here, just doing the best we can to be the best version of ourselves in Christ. And that's so powerful. We need to get out there and share that. A group of people, this church exists more for its non-members than it does its members. Like, you think about all the messages we get here, and it's all about how do we go and save the people that are not a part of our house here. That's pretty special. Yeah. I only just thought of that then, and that's really hard to comprehend. It's true though. Like, I think that's such a blessing to have young people who are just guns, or all people, but tonight young people that are just guns and existing for the sake of other people and carrying Christ into the world. And you can only deliver Christ if you can carry him, and you can only carry him if you're an example. And that's so true. And this place here is so obedient. I love that. I had coffee with a guy this morning, and he asked me about Jesus. Anyway, that's another story, but he asked me about Jesus, and I told him. He's like, it's so interesting. I know a Christian, and he kind of picks and chooses which parts of the rule book he follows. And that makes me so angry when I get labelled like that. And I haven't had that experience here at all yet. And I think that the church generally becomes the church's biggest enemy because of people like that are so compromising. And if we're here, we've got to be all here and so obedient, so true, because I represent you and you represent me and we represent God. And when I have conversations like that over coffee and someone judges me based on that guy's actions, it takes so much work for him to be able to carry Christ. So, yeah.
Very good. All right, does anyone have any questions?
You want to tell a joke?
Hand up.
Not after that, it's too heavy.
The first question's always the most awkward as well. So I did this speech like a year or two ago, and it was for first year university. It was like 1,000 university students, and they said, Brad, you're going to do 45 minutes of questions. And that's either way too long if no one asks a question because it's awkward, or it's way too short if everyone asks questions. And of course, first year, first few days of uni, who wants to ask a question? And anyway, so I'm like, question time, and no one asks a question. And it's just dead silence. And I'm like, this is so awkward. And then finally this girl in the back corner put her hand up and said, I got a question. And I was like, thank God, like, what's the question? She goes, how do you keep your teeth white? Yeah, so I'd love it if you'd ask me a good question. Black Carver soda.
That new charcoal stuff.
My question was specifically about entering yourself in business awards and things like that. So is that something that you've done for a long time and just entered lots of awards and finally won one, or what's the go?
I did a season of entering, so I don't enter at the moment. We're not really getting good PR at the moment. So, but I stopped about 2 years ago, just because it was a different season for us. But yeah, really to start with, we got nominated, so I fell into it. And then from there, the amount of PR we got, I thought this is a winner. Like, it's so much easier to have them tell our story than me pay to tell it. So I found all the different award systems and then chose the ones that I thought we could do best at, and then entered them. It was pretty difficult because they're all pretty long entries, but for someone like you, like the Telstra Businesswoman of the Year, I'd be looking at who's won it, what they've done, and how do you make sure your story sounds better? Honestly though, it's such a perception game. It really is. You got to remember you're competing on status. That I actually don't care who you are; they care what you are, and that's you got to be careful not to compromise when you do that. But that's how you win.
Yes, so you faced a lot of setbacks, like for example, your time in China, where you had to continually keep going for it, like up to 50 times. What's the key that held you in place that said, I'm going to keep going?
Yeah, that's a really good thing. I believe vision overcomes challenge. And Mum always sewed that into us. She said, no matter how big your challenge is, if your vision's a bit bigger, you'll do it. And I think it's so true. And especially when you can align that to it's God's vision, not Brad's vision. Like that works on willpower even. Like if you've got a vision strong enough, you can find the willpower to go and bulldoze everything down. It's just at some point it's going to burn out and you're going to burn out. If you align it to God's vision, you've got conviction, you can do it strong, you can do it on time, on point, with the Holy Spirit being your compass. So for me, it's been how do I get that vision and then constantly just get better and stronger and more congruent to that vision. And how do I become the type of person that will attract that vision into my life? And that's even true with like friendships and mentor and that kind of thing. Like most of our friends, we don't really know how they became our friends. Really, like they just walked into our life one day. And it's because we were being someone that attracted that person. And I think it's the same with material outcomes as well. The material outcome is the expression of our being. So how do we become our vision? And anytime I write down something that I feel like I'm on track to create, I write down, what does God want from me? But most importantly, who does God want me to be to create this? And what version of Brad is going to achieve this? I think that's really powerful. Is that Lucy?
Bradley? Just on a really ground level, how do you keep yourself motivated and just pumping every day?
Christian karaoke in the shower every morning. Wake up, child. Yeah, that's so bad it'll wake anyone up. No, honestly though, I feel like I really did get to a point a year or so ago where I was just done. I was so burned out. And so I think it's easy to motivate yourself, but it's much more powerful to be compelled and pulled by God towards something. And that's what I've felt since I've really been smashed by Christ, is that I'm compelled and pulled towards something. So it comes back to that vision again, I think. If you know where you're going to be, if you know what you're created to do, if you know the platform that God's put in front of you and the path that He's laid out, and you've got absolute conviction on that, then we don't have to carry the burden. It's God's plan, not our plan. So firstly, that means that I haven't had to carry the pressure of performance or the weight of, is it going to fail or is it going to succeed? It's like it will, but in God's time. So that's the first thing, not carrying that performance-based identity. And then the second thing is just spending so much time in prayer and visualization, seeing what's going to happen. Literally seeing 2 years from today, that's going to be amazing. What are you going to say when that happens? What are people going to say? What's God going to think? Is He going to be pleased with me? And I think just that visualization process is so powerful. And I share another story on that as well, because it's so important in my life. And I raced motocross, which most people practice every day, and I didn't have a practice track. And my mum really taught me a lot about visualization. So she's like, while the other guys are out practicing, we're going to sit at home and visualize the perfect race. They're practicing their bad habits, we're practicing the perfect race. And this was so important for me when I had a season of just crashing, broke both my arms, my shoulder, my thumb, my ribs, my leg, my arm. I didn't really ride very well. And it was funny because when I got back on the bike, I was better than when I first started crashing. And the way we did that was my mum would sit with me and she'd help me visualize the perfect race. We'd go through it for the time of the race, see the bumps, see the starts, see the other guys. And I remember it was I was just turning 16, which is the most important year in a motocrosser's career because you go senior that next year. And I'd pictured all winter, because I'd come off so many injuries, all winter, the start of the first race of the season. And I knew who the competitors were going to be. I knew what colour bike, I knew their numbers, I knew my colour bike, I knew my numbers. And I pictured this same start for like 4 months. And it was the other guy was going to be in front, I was going to be behind, I knew where I was going to pass him. And it makes all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up because it played out exactly like that. I literally passed him on the same corner. And I think that's the power of visualization. It doesn't always happen that perfect, but that for me just reinforced the more we can see it, the more we can do it. Yeah. So. So true. I just always have sent versus went in my mind at the moment. Like, ever I went on my willpower, it's not good. Ever I sent by God, it was good. So how do I grab hold of the prophetic and spend so much time just seeing it? What does that look like, God? How do I align today to that, God? What would Brad need to do today to make that happen tomorrow, God? Does that answer your question?
I've got the liberty because I've got the mic. Matthew McConaughey said in some interview that his hero is him in 10 years. Who's your hero?
I like that quote. I always used to love the quote, hell on earth would be to meet the man you could have been. That's a good one. Yeah. Hell on earth would be to meet the man that you could have become. So are you playing to your potential? What if one day we got to sit at God's feet and see everything we could have been if we're obedient, and see everything we didn't become when we compromised? That really stirs me. What was your question?
Doesn't even matter. Who's your hero?
Honestly that's such a cliche answer here, but it is right now. It's like everything is about how do I become Jesus, but like Jesus. And it's so nice to have people that you idolize in the world of parts of their life, more so model parts of their life. But just to know who you are in Christ is the most powerful thing. And to carry the peace of that, to carry just the confidence in that, to carry his heart, the connection we all have. That's the most powerful thing that's ever happened to me, and I didn't really expect to say that. Can we filter this question?
You might have to a little bit. So obviously you've been extremely successful for the past 15 years. I'm going to have to block the microphone. But what's kept you from being in a very competitive market from becoming an asshole?
My mum. And my sister, definitely. Honestly, my family, we have a very truth-based. Anyone who knows my family knows it's a very truth-based family, and we've been great friends. We work together, and I moved out of home, and they moved into my home, so I now live with them too. So definitely just constant and live, factual feedback. Mum never pumped our tyres up. She always told us the truth. When we were great, she'd tell us we're great. When we were not, she would tell us we're great people and what we're doing is not great. So our identity was always we're great people, or I'm a good boy, but what you're doing is not a good thing. I feel like that's amazing parenting advice, I reckon.
I know your business model and everything's great and your ideas are excellent. How did you shift from outworking that business plan to then talking to other people? I know you're involved with ICMI or whatever it is, and then speaking and doing the motivation stuff with other people. Yeah, well,
ICMI are a speaking agency, and about 6 years ago, so I probably should tell you, when I went to high school, if I got an award or something at school, I'd pretend I wasn't there. Like, I would never get in front of people and talk ever. Like, just pretend I wasn't there. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a principal of a school ring up and say, Brad, I want you to come and speak at our graduation. Got a lot of young guys, really high disengaged youth and disengaged young men, and they like motorcycles, so I want you to come and tell your story. And I said, there's no chance. I'm not coming to speak in front of 300 people. And then he called me back the next week, then the next week, then the next week. And about 3 months later, I said, okay, I'll do it. And I typed out my speech and I stood at the thing and I like shaked and sweated. And I don't reckon anyone heard a thing because it was like so nervous. But afterwards, I felt like, I don't know, like now I look back and join the dots. It was really God saying, that's a skill you're going to need. Like I just felt so compelled to say, I've got to get good at that. If I'm going to become the person that I feel like I'm going to become, I've got to be able to communicate and do it well. And I really sucked at that time. And then the second thing was, about a month later, I had some of those young guys come into my shop, and they said that they'd changed some things. They said that my speech changed, they'll like some of the ways they live in their life, and they were inspired by it, and it mattered. And man, I was like, wow. Firstly, I felt like I wanted to get better, so I felt like I was growing personally. Secondly, I got some significance because people said nice things about it. And thirdly, I felt like I was contributing because these guys are like, it mattered, and you only need 3 human needs to be met for it to be an addiction. And it became one. I was like, I'm going to get good at this thing. And that meant that I was also lucky through ICMI that the number 1 speaker in the country at the time was Robin Moore, the voice of Blinky Bill. And she came and watched me speak. Is that better? Yeah. She came and watched me speak at a school once, and she goes, Brad, you got some work to do, but I can really see something. So I'm going to introduce you to ICMI, and I'm going to put you through this coaching program. And she taught me the things about becoming a speaker. And ICMI are amazing, not this year because of all my legal stuff, but last year did over 100 speaking events all around the place, and it was crazy, but that's too many. But it was one heck of a journey, that's for sure. And the way that it really came into my life was just practice. Like the amount of times I'd speak in front of the mirror, or I'd tell mum the story, or just be driving in the car sharing the story with myself. Like, if I'm going to be on stage, I'm going to make sure it matters, and I want to make sure that it's fun, that they take something home, that they like the story, they're inspired. And if that's going to happen, I've got to get good at talking. And I still got a lot to do, but I did a lot of speeches and it became easier. I've got to learn how to hold a microphone still.
So hearing your story about, going to China and like all the things you did, in your teenage years, that's like so clearly not what a lot of teenagers do. What was going on like within you? What was like what motivated you to go like, no one around me does this, but I'm going to spend my money, I'm going to risk, I'm going to have this dream and be rejected time and time again? Like, what drove that, when I doubt there was probably a lot of people around you going like, yeah, I do that too. Like, just go to China. And, what was going on inside of you to drive that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love asking people that type of question. For me, Mum always told us we were different. So I knew from the age of 12 that my identity was different to that of my friends. And that was so important. And I think that's so important for us as Christians to know that we're different. We're not going to do what our friends do. They're our friends. We love them. They're heaps of fun. But we're not going to be like our friends in the world because we're different. And Mum just every day would say we're Smiths and we're different. And I never knew what that meant at 13, but at 18 I started to realise that I am different. My mates are going partying and all I want to do is build my business or race my dirt bike. And Monday to Friday I want to get better at that. And I was really driven by just becoming better and bigger and performance, which is a healthy thing to be able to flick on and off. It's not a healthy thing to become your identity. And that's a really important thing. It's if you know your identity in Christ, and then you can turn on your ability to say, I don't care what people think of me, I'm going big, and I'm going for it, and I don't care how many times I fail, I don't care what people say or do, or the crazier they think I am, the better, because when I pull it off, it's going to be a better story. And I constantly thought about that. I constantly thought about the day that I went in and gave up my apprenticeship, that my mates thought I'd landed the best job, and I've walked in and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Cromarty, I'm going to chase my dream." And I sounded so cliche, but I thought about that every day. Like, man, I don't want that guy to be like have to go back and apply for that job again. So that was number one, and number two was I had so many people that wanted to see me fail, and I still do. Like the police stuff is a prime example of that, and I think that came from having quite a lot of success really young. People just wanted to see the end of that, and I just always felt like I got to get so good that people can't ignore it, and that can be an unhealthy thought pattern as well. So you got to be careful of that. But I think it's so powerful to be able to turn on and off, to say I'm different. I'm going to get so good you can't ignore me, and I'm going to do it as well as I possibly can until it happens. It comes back to identity. All that stuff is we're so blessed to have leaders here that talk into our identities, because if we know who we are, we can't be shaken. If we seek no approval because we're already approved, then you can go wherever you need to go. And it's so important for us as we go out to our cities, as we go out and shift people's hearts, as we build strategies to make a difference in the world, as we align our lives to the purpose or the platform that we're going to use to deliver God's purpose. It's so important to remember that our identity is in Christ. Jesus was the ultimate disruptor, always kind, always loving, always of the truth with no compromise. And that's us.
Could God's dream and your dream for your motorcycle business?
What was the start of the question, Phil?
Could yours and God's vision is the same? Is it the same for your motorcycle business?
Is my vision and God's vision the same for the motorcycles?
Yeah.
They weren't. No, I don't think. Like, I was doing some good stuff, not a lot of God stuff. But more and more now, I'm doing what I can to align my motorcycle business to God. And the strategy we're working on right now is that I've really felt God say to me a few things this year. Firstly, local, and secondly, linear. That's been such a strong thing on my heart, which is playing out. And the third thing that I've really felt him say is that he's a God of and, not a God of if, not a God of but or this or that. He's a God of and. And for me, in my business, that's shown up in that you can make impact and you can make income. You don't have to do one or the other. And I've always said that I would spend my 20s commercially getting set up so I can spend my 30s contributing. And it's turned out that I'm nearly 30 and that plan hasn't worked out awesome. But I've been challenged by God to say you can do both now. How do you align all the things you've learned of the world to make both impact and income? And my motorcycle business is about to be the commercial aspect that funds and drives our contribution model. And I feel like we're about to do our life's best work with the plan that God's given us in relationship to that. You think about a motorcycle, why do people want a bike? They want freedom, they want an identity, or they want an escape, really. And they think they need a bike, but really they need God. And we can use that to raise up great men, and great men can change the town because they can change the home. And if we can change the home, we can fix most of the problems in Frankston. And you think about Frankston, some of the pain points here. You have 51% of 15 to 17-year-olds having unprotected sex in the city that's number one for teenage parents. And in the city that's number 1 or 2, I can't remember, for broken homes. Look at that thread. If we can train the men up and help them, they think they need a motorcycle, they really need God. We can use the bike as the entry to that. Anyway, that's yeah.
What you said about your general manager really struck me, because I thought that one day we might be in positions where we're in places of influence and the enemy or people around us are going after the people close to us.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that in yourself and help them and not let that stop you?
That's a really good question. I think firstly, we got to remember how powerful just one or two conversations can be if we're congruent to that conversation. And I always share Lucy's story because she stayed at my house with Mum. When was that, Lucy? Like 3 years ago. Was that?
2014.
So 3 years ago, roughly. And she would just share conversations with Mum that would get back to me, and I'd be so intrigued. Isn't that interesting? Like a young girl staying at our house talking to my mum, and I've got all these amazing coaches, and I'd be like, what did she say? What were you guys talking about? Tell me that conversation. And I think that's such a metaphor for the power that we can have in one conversation. So firstly, you've got to understand the power of it and that it is effective, and that curiosity is just, that's the whole game almost. And secondly, just know who we are. If we know that we're with Christ and that we're doing God's plan, then we can't catch that of the world. And for me, it's just been constantly staying in prayer. Like before I went to that breakfast with coffee with the guy the other day, Daniel, that I told you about, I was like, God, just let me be me. Let me be so true to who you are and so true to who you've made me that I don't catch any of his stuff. And I didn't know that he was going to say that comment that he said, and that was going to be the spark for a really deep conversation. I was just having a laugh and it just came out. And I don't know, that's what I've just constantly focused on. It's still something we all have to work on. And, I get with my mates and start having some banter and having some fun, and I've got to be like, come back, how would Jesus act here? And but it's something that I think we can all be focused on, and when we think about it and when we're aware of it, it's so easy. Is it the battery or the user? Battery.
Yeah, so you said before, like, ambition was like a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Like, ambition is in God. What does that look like? Like, for you, what's kind of the main difference that you find now?
Did you say ambition in God or ambition? Yeah.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think that's so powerful. To be so ambitious to align your life with heavenly principles and the kingdom and who Jesus is, that's the most powerful thing you could do, because that's identity. I feel like if you're ambitious for, seeking God's heart, seeking your identity and aligning your identity to the identity of Jesus and carrying Christ, that's the most powerful thing you can do. There's no danger in that. But the danger is when we have ambition for things outside, status-based stuff. If you're ambitious of something that creates the what in your life rather than the who in your life, then you're probably at risk. And that's what my life was like. I was so ambitious for the what that my identity was able to be compromised for the sake of progress. So I think that it's a really important question you ask, and that is that, number one, the prerequisite is that we never compromise our identity in Christ. Number two is we never compromise, that we got to take action. Like, we can't be lazy, we can be patient. Massive difference.
How do you think you have gone in terms of having a balanced lifestyle when you have all these awesome things going for you and all these awesome dreams and stuff you want to do and business is thriving, but then the other aspects of life, like having good rest and, looking after your body and relationships, and you've talked about personal development, which is good, but the other areas, do you think that you've had a balanced lifestyle, and how has that been for you?
That's a really good question, and no, I definitely haven't had a balanced lifestyle. I do now, I really do feel now, because I've put boundaries and guardrails up, but in the past I definitely haven't. It's really only been the last year, maybe 2 years, that I've started to, actually only really the last year that I've started to get balance. And that is that when I was young, it was just all or nothing on whatever we're doing. If we're doing business, who cares how much we sleep? We're doing it. If we're racing motocross, nothing else matters. Let's be the best. And that's not healthy. I think it's healthy to be able to flick that switch from time to time. There's always seasons where we need to say, look, my comfort's going to get put aside and I'm all in, definitely. But we also have to have boundaries around, you want to have dinner at home. You want to be with your family. You want to make sure that you go to the gym. You want to make sure that you eat healthy. You want to make sure you drink enough water. You need your health. And that's been the difference in, meeting Christ and really having Jesus come into my life, is that I appreciate all that stuff so much more. And I didn't really realize that at the start. I didn't expect to get smashed by Jesus, and all of a sudden my life slows down, in the way of balancing up. But that's so important. If the home is the most powerful thing that we can do in the kingdom, then we have to make sure that we've got boundaries around the things that are status, not stature. And status is our workplace, because our workplace is not our purpose, it's our platform to deliver God's purpose. So for me, I just had to put some boundaries up, and that was that I don't work on weekends, or don't work Sundays ever now. I used to. I don't work every Saturday. I go home and I don't open the laptop. If I can't do it in the time that's been allocated to do it, then it's not God's plan. Seriously, do you think God would want you working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, striving? Always just think of that thing like sheep don't leap. We're following a shepherd. No sheep is leaping forwards. No sheep is running across the paddock. They're just following the shepherd in his timing. And for me, that's been in my work. If I've got a strategy, I've got something I feel like God's put on my heart, then I'm going to give it everything I've got for the time I've got. And then when I'm not, I'm going to put my laptop down. I'm going to go home and be with my family. And when I'm at the gym, I'm going to be at the gym. And when I'm, going to sleep, I'm going to be asleep. I used to take notes in the middle of the night when I woke up. And since meeting Jesus, I've been like, you know what? If it's God's plan, it'll be there in the morning. If something comes to me in the middle of the night, I'm not going to spend any time figuring out how, because if it's God's plan, I just have to trust the what, not the how. And he'll put the how in front of me. And just those things have really helped my life become slower and more local and more linear. And just always asking, is that you, God? And you know how I said local and linear was put on my heart? Well, my speaking contracts meant that I was literally never home. I think I told you guys 8 nights the year before last was at home outside of Christmas, because I was just on the road every time. And I felt at the start of this year, God say, if you're only going to do a speech if I say it's my speech. It's a skill that can be used later, but not now. You got to get your own house in order. You got to get your own stuff in order first, and then we'll use it again. And that's a challenge, because I love it. I get my ego stroked. I feel like I make a difference. I feel like I'm growing. I make good money. Everything it's an addiction. And so God said, just keep it local, keep it linear, and I'll tell you if we're doing it or not. And then after I made that decision, I got a phone call to say that I got invited to speak for Clipsal at the Clipsal 500, get to go in the V8s, get to hang out for the weekend, access all areas, all these things that I would love. And I was like, it's not local, it's not linear, it's cool, but it's not God. So say no. And that's been the hardest thing, I think, is just being obedient to that. But there's no burden in that, because you feel the benefit immediately. It's so peaceful to not have to get on that plane. So peaceful to not have to go and, tickle people's egos to be in a corporate facility, doing this speaking thing. It was nice just to be fully with God and just know that what he said, he said.
Anyone else? Last question.
Soapy Shads.
Question.
When you get a really sick idea and it sparks massive passion, how do you distinguish it between a Brad idea and a God idea?
Wow, that's so good. And that's something that I asked Caleb for a year. How do I know this is Brad or God? And he just kept saying, you got to reconcile what's being said versus what's being said. That's the first step. Is it in line with heavenly principles? Or, which to me comes back to, is it status or is it stature? Is it generational or is it short term? And we all know the nature of our God and our Father, and that is that he wants to create sustainable, generational, impact. He doesn't really care if you're going to go do a speech in Adelaide. That's not going to make generational, impact. That was Brad's status, would love to do it. And I think that sort of question and reconciling, is it Brad or is it God, is the most critical part of the journey with Christ, and it's something that I'm really working on continually. And I don't think I've got it perfect yet, but just to constantly be in prayer, verify it with our spiritual fathers, and then verify it with men of the world that, don't really know that we're on a God journey. Like, let's not say God said and use that as a label to be an excuse to do it. Let's make sure God said. And that's a real risk of the church, I think, is that as soon as you say God told me to do it, I don't question whether you should do it or not. I don't really say, did God really say to do it? So for me, it's just verifying. If it's God, he's going to show you. God clearly opened the door or clearly closed the door, and he will.
One more. What clicked with you to know that you were going to become an entrepreneur? Like, where do you just get that? Was it the teachings from, like listening to stuff in the car? Was it the stuff with your family not having enough money and you felt like that needed to rise and you needed to make money? Like, what shifted in your life to know that, like, I want to become an entrepreneur, I want to, like, change the world, that sort of thing?
I think the other side to that is, how do you know that you're not an entrepreneur? That's a really important thing, because entrepreneur is a buzzword at the moment. I hate the word. And how do you know you're not an entrepreneur? If you go to university to study entrepreneurship, you're not an entrepreneur. And I'm not saying that that's a hard thing, but that's the truth. And I also might just define entrepreneur. To me, an entrepreneur is someone who creates massive change by doing something that hasn't yet been done. So creates value by doing something that hasn't yet been done, which means you've got to have the nature of risk. You've got to have a risk profile that can carry risk, and you've got to be the person that's willing to stand out here and be so wrong. So many people tell you what you're doing is wrong. So many people against what you're doing, but you see something they don't. And I think that's attractive to aspirational people. Like, we love the sound of that, but it's not everyone's nature, and it's also not very pretty. Like, that is actually not fun. To actually be out here, and if you make a mistake, everyone loses their house and doesn't get paid, and if you're right, everyone makes impact and income. Like, that's a very volatile position to be in. So number one, if you've gone to university to study entrepreneurship, you're not an entrepreneur, but you may become an entrepreneurial thinking employee, or you may even become an entrepreneurial thinking manager, or you may even become an entrepreneurial thinking leader, and all are great, but you're not an entrepreneur. So that's number one. Number two is, if you don't like risk, you're not an entrepreneur. And number three, if you've never done a transaction to try and create value just naturally, just because you love it, you're not an entrepreneur. You look at any great entrepreneur and they've just done it naturally. Richard Branson couldn't help himself as a young man. Who's another great entrepreneur? Like, even Bill Gates, I wouldn't even call him an entrepreneur, but he just couldn't help but go and code computers and get curious about that at his age. It was just his nature. Yeah, I'd love you to. I think that's so true. We've got to be really careful not to use the label of entrepreneur or not as a restriction. But I also think it's really important to know your nature. Like, I don't see you as an entrepreneur. I see you as an obedient Christian who happens to own a business. I see you as someone who loves people, who happens to have a platform of your business or your skill set to deliver that. I see an entrepreneur as someone who has to step way out and take risk to make change, to add value. So it's a label, like, who really cares? The guts of it is just don't hide behind the label. It's the same as what we said before. Like, if God said, we can hide behind that. If we can say we're entrepreneurial and hide behind that, anyone who introduces themselves as an entrepreneur is generally not an entrepreneur. I couldn't think of anything worse. I'm entrepreneurial. I don't care what you call me. I'd actually prefer you not to know what I'm up to, because more of the stuff that I do is going to not happen in the timeline that I think it's going to happen, because it's not normal. Like, the things that we're working on at the moment, most people think we're crazy. And yes, it's God's plan. Yes, I fully believe that it's been verified of that, but it's entrepreneurial because that's my nature. Like, I'm still going to be a filter for God's plan at some level. So, yeah.
Well, I know you've pretty much challenged everyone here. Thank you so much, Brad, for the man you are and the man you're becoming, and the fight you're in, and for remaining all those years. If you hadn't have remained, not only wouldn't you have a business, but you wouldn't be here speaking to us. You wouldn't have impacted all the people you've impacted, and who knows where you'd be. Who knows where we'd be as a result. This is I can't put value to tonight. You've blown my mind. You've given me such a passion and unlocked something in me, and I'm sure it's unlocked things in everyone here that couldn't have been unlocked if you hadn't have fought and stayed in the battle. So we honour you for that, and we thank you for that.
Thank you, guys. No, but seriously, thank you guys for, as I've entered into the church, it's one thing to come here and see Caleb as an amazing leader, and our leader's been amazing. But what I'm so impressed and constantly inspired by is the young people here. You guys are seriously carrying something that I don't even know if you realise. I've spent so much time in the world, in worldly ways and worldly events, and I've done so many events, and you don't see this. Brilliant students, hungry to learn, hungry to be obedient to God, so desperate to carry Christ to the world and exist not for yourself but for the benefit of, saving others. That's so special, and just don't underestimate the impact you can make just by doing that. One conversation, one word, one coffee, one comment over coffee, one comment at the sales register. All these little things, when you carry it, means something. When you're not obedient to it, it doesn't mean anything. And you guys are. I'm just so inspired, and I really believe that this Christian army is going to change the world, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. And that's really why I'm here. So I thank you guys, and just remind you that it's so worth it.
Very good. Thank you, Brad. Good job. It was an intimate night. It was great. It was very good. I want to encourage you all to, like what Josh said as well, there's a difference between motivation and inspiration. Motivation will just G you up. It'll get you going. But inspiration, really triggers something that's already on the inside of you. So I've re-recorded this, so I will make it available for you. And I encourage you to go over, because there was so much in what Brad's answered, so much gold in that for you to really go over and allow it to really trigger in you, what's already inside of you. And it's going to look different for all of us, but really to use that like leverage. We use the word leverage tonight a lot, but using that as leverage to, to see you go and stand at the gates like we've been hearing about and all that sort of stuff. So I really encourage you with that, okay? Just to really allow it, go back, listen over, and really allow certain things to trigger inside of you what's already there. So you're not going to go away on a high and then 2 weeks later nothing happens, but really allow it to trigger something that's on the inside of you, because that will help keep you motivated. That will help momentum build, which is what we're talking about this year, for your future. Yeah? Awesome. Great. Thank you, Brad. Let's thank him one more time.